Chapters 5 and 6 of Book 8 of Les Miserables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by May Lowe. Les Miserables, Volume 3, by Victor Hugo. Translated by Isabel Florence Hapgood. Book 8, The Wicked Poor Man. Chapter 5, A Providential Peephole. Marius had lived for 5 years in poverty, in destitution, even in distress, but now he perceived that he had not known real misery. True misery he had but just had a view of. It was its spectre which had just passed before his eyes. In fact, he who has only beheld the misery of man has seen nothing. The misery of woman is what he must see. He who has seen only the misery of woman has seen nothing. He must see the misery of the child. When a man has reached his last extremity, he has reached his last resources at the same time. Woe to the defenceless beings who surround him. Work, wages, bread, fire, courage, goodwill, all fail him simultaneously. The light of day seems extinguished without, the moral light within. In these shadows, man encounters the feebleness of the woman and the child, and bends them violently to ignominy. Then all horrors become possible. Despair is surrounded with fragile partitions which all open on either vice or crime. Health, youth, honor, all the shy delicacies of the young body, the heart, virginity, modesty, that epidermis of the soul, are manipulated in sinister wise by that fumbling which seeks resources, which encounters opprobrium, and which accommodates itself to it. Fathers, mothers, children, brothers, sisters, men, women, daughters, adhere and become incorporated, almost like a mineral formation, in that dusky promiscuousness of sexes, relationships, ages, infamies, and innocences. They crouch back to back in a sort of hut of fate. They exchange woe-begone glances. Oh, the unfortunate wretches! How pale they are! How cold they are! It seems as though they dwelt in a planet much further from the sun than ours. This young girl was to Marius a sort of messenger from the realm of sad shadows. She revealed to him a hideous side of the night. Marius almost reproached himself for the preoccupations of reverie and passion which had prevented his bestowing a glance on his neighbors up to that day. The payment of their rent had been a mechanical movement, which any one would have yielded to. But he, Marius, should have done better than that. What! Only a wall separated him from these abandoned beings, who lived gropingly in the dark, outside the pale of the rest of the world. He was elbow to elbow with them. He was, in some sort, the last link of the human race which they touched. He heard them live, or rather rattle in the death agony beside him, and he paid no heed to them. Every day, every instant, he heard them walking on the other side of the wall. He heard them go, and come, and speak, and he did not even lend an ear. And groans lay in those words, and he did not even listen to them. His thoughts were elsewhere, given up to dreams, to impossible radiances, to loves in the air, to follies. And all the while, human creatures, his brothers in Jesus Christ, his brothers in the people, were agonizing in vain beside him. He even formed a part of their misfortune, and he aggravated it, for if they had had another neighbor who was less chimerical and more attentive, any ordinary and charitable man, evidently their indigence would have been noticed. Their signals of distress would have been perceived, and they would have been taken hold of and rescued. They appeared very corrupt and very depraved, no doubt, very vile, very odious even. But those who fall without becoming degraded are rare. Besides, there is a point where the unfortunate and the infamous unite and are confounded in a single word, a fatal word, the miserable. Whose fault is this? And then should not the charity be all the more profound, in proportion as the fall is great? While reading himself this moral lesson, for there were occasions on which Marius, like all truly honest hearts, was his own pedagogue and scolded himself more than he deserved, He stared at the wall which separated him from the Jondrettes, as though he were able to make his gaze, full of pity, penetrate that partition and warm these wretched people. The wall was a thin layer of plaster, upheld by laths and beams, and, as the reader had just learned, it allowed the sound of voices and words to be clearly distinguished. Only a man as dreamy as Marius could have failed to perceive this long before. There was no paper pasted on the wall, either on the side of the Jondrettes or on that of Marius. The coarse construction was visible in its nakedness. Marius examined the partition, almost unconsciously. Sometimes reverie examines, observes, and scrutinizes as thought would. All at once he sprang up. He had just perceived, near the top, close to the ceiling, a triangular hole which resulted from the space between three laths. The plaster which should have filled this cavity was missing, and, by mounting on the commode, a view could be had through this aperture into the Jondrettes' attic. Commiseration has, and should have, its curiosity. This aperture formed a sort of peep-hole. It is permissible to gaze at misfortune like a traitor in order to succour it. Let us get some little idea of what these people are like, thought Marius, and in what condition they are. He climbed upon the commode, put his eye to the crevice, and looked. Chapter 6. The Wild Man in his Lair. Cities, like forests, have their caverns in which all the most wicked and formidable creatures which they contain conceal themselves. Only in cities, that which thus conceals itself is ferocious, unclean, and petty, that is to say, ugly. In forests, that which conceals itself is ferocious, savage, and grand, that is to say, beautiful. Taking one lair with another, the beast's is preferable to the man's. Caverns are better than hovels. What Marius now beheld was a hovel. Marius was poor, and his chamber was poverty-stricken, but as his poverty was noble, his garret was neat. The den upon which his eye now rested was abject, dirty, fetid, pestiferous, mean, sordid. The only furniture consisted of a straw chair, an infirm table, some old bits of crockery, and in two of the corners, two indescribable pallets. All the light was furnished by a dormer window of 4 panes, draped with spiders' webs. Through this aperture, there penetrated just enough light to make the face of a man appear like the face of a phantom. The walls had a leprous aspect, and were covered with seams and scars, like a visage disfigured by some horrible malady. A repulsive moisture exuded from them. Obscene sketches roughly sketched with charcoal could be distinguished upon them. The chamber which Marius occupied had a dilapidated brick pavement. This one was neither tiled nor planked. Its inhabitants stepped directly on the antique plaster of the hovel, which had grown black under the long-continued pressure of feet. Upon this uneven floor, where the dirt seemed to be fairly encrusted, and which possessed but one virginity, that of the broom, were capriciously grouped constellations of old shoes, socks, and repulsive rags. However, this room had a fireplace, so it was let for 40 francs a year. There was every sort of thing in that fireplace, a brazier, a pot, broken boards, rags suspended from nails, a bird-cage, ashes, and even a little fire. 2 brands were smouldering there in a melancholy way. One thing which added still more to the horrors of this garret was, that it was large. It had projections and angles and black holes, the lower sides of roofs, bays, and promontories. Hence horrible, unfathomable nooks, where it seemed as though spiders as big as one's fist, woodlice as large as one's foot, and perhaps even, who knows, some monstrous human beings must be hiding. One of the pallets was near the door, the other near the window. One end of each touched the fireplace and faced Marius. In a corner near the aperture through which Marius was gazing, a colored engraving in a black frame was suspended to a nail on the wall, and at its bottom, in large letters, was an inscription, "The Dream." This represented a sleeping woman and a child also asleep, the child on the woman's lap, an eagle in a cloud, with a crown in his beak, and the woman